how to knit a braided Celtic knot scarf. Hi, I'm Kristen and welcome back to my channel, Studio Knit. For a little luck of the Irish, let's knit up this braided Celtic knot scarf. And this intertwined design is a really fun one. You can wear it as an infinity scarf. You can also stretch it out just a little bit, covering your shoulders like a mock shrug. And with this intertwined braided design, it is definitely a statement piece. In the written pattern, you'll see that I do have different size options. You can do a 32-inch, 36-inch, or 40-inch circumference. That is what your scarf will be all the way around. And if you're excited to knit up this scarf yourself, please like up this video. It really helps me out. Inspired by my new Knit Stitch pattern book, experienced beginning knitters will confidently knit up the scarf while learning a few extra techniques along the way. We're knitting 3 textured patterns: the simple garter stitch, stockinette stitch, and a large swath of the graphic parallelogram stitch. For our materials, we're using long size 11 US knitting needles with some bulky number 5 weight yarn. I also have a little bit of scrap yarn. You'll see how we're using that later, along with scissors and a tapestry needle. To begin, we are casting on a total of 30 stitches. I'm just using the basic long tail cast on method for these 30 stitches here. For section 1, can't get any easier than this. We are doing the garter stitch. That is simply knitting every single stitch for a total of 8 rows. So we're just knitting every single row, 8 rows total. And then we're taking our tapestry needle and that little bit of scrap yarn, I'm using white here in this example, and we are going to place all of our stitches on this piece of yarn, which is acting like a stitch holder, because in section 2 coming up, we are going to make those long loops that create the braided Celtic knot. So here, our very first 6 stitches, we're going to begin by knitting those. Take your knitting needle from the left and you will place your stitches back on to your straight needle, and then you'll want to remove the little scrap yarn on these 6 stitches so that you can knit them up. And these long loops are knitted in the stockinette stitch, and that is knitting on the right side. And then row 2 is purling. So this is the wrong side of our work. We're going to purl all of the stitches. And so this stockinette stitch, if you have knit it before, you know that it tends to curl up. And we're intentionally wanting these loops to curl up. So the stockinette stitch is perfect. You'll continue the stockinette stitch for a total of 32 rows. And then you will be taking these stitches off of the needle by using another piece of scrap yarn and treating that as your stitch holder, freeing up your straight knitting needle so that you can knit the other 4 of these long loops. So you'll want to break your yarn and repeat these steps until you have all 5 loops. Taking a moment to admire our work so far, we have that garter stitch, section 1 on the bottom, and then we have our 5 loops, and they are being held by some scrap yarn as a stitch marker. You can see we have a lot of yarn tails, and so I'm choosing to clean those up right now. You can leave everything to the end, but I think it's really nice to just sort of clean it up as you go. So I'm going to be weaving in those ends from the beginning of our work and cutting off the yarn so it's nice and clean. So this is the wrong side of our work, and here we are admiring it from the right side of our work with those pretty little loops. So now we're going to place all of the stitches back on to our knitting needle. So again, starting from the left, go ahead and thread that straight knitting needle back through all of your stitches. And when you're done, take off that stitch holder because you won't need it anymore. And now we start the parallelogram stitch. Now, one little tip, I like to take both my yarn tail and the new yarn and knit those together. It just helps keep it a little bit tighter. And so everything is on your straight needle and you will follow the parallelogram stitch pattern. Again, we have these little yarn tails and I like to clean them up. Okay, so carrying on, knit the parallelogram stitch. You'll want to get that written pattern. It's all just knits and purls. It's very simple, but we are not going to be spending our time watching me knit and purl for a few hours. So let's jump to the parallelogram stitch being all knitted up and beautiful and placed back on the stitch holder of that scrap yarn. Now at this point, I love blocking my work. So while it's in this one long rectangle piece, you can simply wet your garment, lay it out on your blocking mats, and just allow it to air dry overnight. I want to point out for our stockinette stitch loops, we do not want to block those because we want it to be all curled up unto itself. We don't want to flatten those out. So when you're blocking, you can just leave those alone. Okay, section 4, we are making those stockinette stitch loops again. So we're beginning with the first 6 stitches, placing them back onto our straight knitting needle, getting rid of that stitch holder so that we can knit the stockinette stitch to create those nice long loops. And it's just knitting on the right side, purling on the wrong side for a total of 32 rows for each. And this time for your stitch holders, you want just tiny little pieces to hold each of the loops individually for the braiding process. You don't want them all attached. You want them separate, just like this. Oh, they're so cute, and we are getting so close to the end already. So let's bring our entire scarf into frame, and I'm going to sort of style it as though I am wearing it. Everything is the right side that we can see, and we will flip our scarf over as though we're wearing it, and it is time to braid. So you just take one of the loops and you intertwine it. So to begin, I'm going to go over, under, and finishing over. And on our second loop, I'm going to alternate that. So I'll begin going under, over, and finishing up under. And we just repeat this. So on the third, we're doing it the same as we did on the first, beginning with over and finishing with over. And then on the fourth, it's just like we did for the second one. We begin with under, over, and finish with it under right there. And here we go on number 5, beginning over, under, and finishing with it over. Oh, it looks so cool. Okay, so let's get those stitches back onto our knitting needle. And again, we're starting from the left and placing all of our 30 stitches back onto our straight knitting needle. And you can take those little stitch holders off as you go. So let's move our piece around so that our knitting needle is positioned so that I can actually knit from it. And we have all of those yarn tails again. I like to knit the yarn tail on the first stitch together with my yarn. It just helps it stay in place a little bit better, I feel. And we are knitting every single row again because this is the garter stitch. It doesn't get any easier than this. And you'll be knitting all of your stitches back onto your knitting needle. And then it is cast off time already. So I'm just going to bind off very loosely, just the standard way that we usually do. Of course, all of the knitting techniques I do have linked for you if you need to brush up on any of these basic knitting techniques. And once you're finished binding off all of your stitches, we are almost there. We are going to cut our yarn, take our tapestry needle, and weave right through that last little loop, and then weave in all of our ends. I'm not sure how many ends you have. It does go pretty quickly, so I wouldn't dread it too much. And you are done. You can have a lot of fun styling this piece however you wish. This is what the front of it looks like. And here, let's look at that parallelogram stitch on the back of our work. I just think it's so beautiful and elegant, and blocking it really gives it a really nice, smooth look. Again, this design was inspired by my new Knit Stitch pattern book, which is available both in a printed and an ebook format. So I'll have the link for you. You can go down and get your very own copy of that. You will need the full written pattern. So I have that available for you totally for free over on my website, Studio Knit. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are inspired to knit up your very own braided Celtic knot scarf. And I have so many more fun Celtic cable patterns that I hope you check out as well. Bye!